So we are in the Tanya in chapter 11, and we're just about ready to get to the purpose of the book of the Beinoni, the book of the intermediary person, the average person, which is the service of most people. But before we get to that, we spent first 8 chapters describing the makeup of the two souls. Chapter 9, we discussed the battle. In other words, what the souls want. Each soul wants complete dominance. And then chapter 10 and 11, we look at the extremes. The extremes are the righteous, and that was last week. And we had within the righteous, we had completely righteous or not completely righteous. But the definition of righteous was not the conventional definition. Conventional definition of righteous is someone who does the right thing, who acts, doesn't sin. The Tanya's definition of righteousness is not only that somebody who doesn't sin, but it's somebody who doesn't have a desire to sin. Okay, so that sort of puts it out of the realm for most people. Doesn't have a desire to sin. Why? The righteous person has no desire to sin because the animal soul, either if he's an incomplete tzaddik, if he's an incomplete righteous person, the animal soul is so minute and so insignificant and so small within his personality that it does not have the strength to create a negative urge. That's an incomplete tzaddik. And the complete tzaddik doesn't have any desire for negativity because the animal soul actually transformed to holiness, and the animal soul itself wants to come close to God. So that's the extreme. That's the God. That's the soul. That's the godly soul. That's the completely righteous person who does not have, practically speaking, does not have any urge for negativity. So what's a tzaddik according to the Tanya? Not somebody who doesn't sin, not someone who studies Torah all day, not somebody who didn't stop learning Torah even for 1 minute, like we discussed in the first page of the Tanya. Rabbah, one of the great Talmudic sages, never stopped saying words of Torah, and yet he said, I'm a Beinoni, I'm intermediary. How could that be? Isn't he righteous? Isn't he completely righteous? Well, no, not according to the definition of a Tanya. Definition of a Tanya is righteousness is not about what you do. It's about what is the inner state of your being. If I have a desire for negativity, if my animal soul is still felt, I'm not completely righteous, because we're not talking about action. We're talking about the state of who I am. So that was the extreme. Last week we spent time with the righteous and the completely righteous. This week we're going to speak about the other side, the Rasha. I don't want to translate it as wicked because you'll see not all Rashayim are so wicked. We would call some Rashayim, some wicked people, we would say, oh, it's not a bad level to be at. But so I'm just going to use the Hebrew word Rasha, the opposite of tzaddik. And also here there are 2 levels that correspond to the incomplete Rasha and complete Rasha. Here too, there's a very big spectrum. And here too, this is not where a person should be. A person should strive to be a Beinoni, the intermediary person. Spoiler alert. What's the intermediary person? We're going to say next week. Next week we have a full chapter, quite a long chapter, that describes the Beinoni, the intermediary person. Intermediary person is someone who desires to do, who has impulses from the animal soul. So he has desire for negativity, but he is not considered a Rasha. He's not wicked because his garments, his thought, speech, and action is completely in the control of the godly soul. So when am I a Beinoni? If I never speak, do, or think anything negative, then I'm a Beinoni. Why am I not righteous? Because I'm not righteous because I can have a desire for negativity. Why am I not wicked? Because my garments are complete. My garments are in complete control of the godly soul. And this week, like I said, we're going to talk about the person who is wicked not only because they have a negative desire, that doesn't make you wicked, but because they succumb to the negative desire within the thought, speech, or action. Now, to make you wicked, it doesn't really matter if it's a big sin or a small sin. The question is, am I in control? The king wants complete control. Each king wants dominance of the city. So you can imagine the king calls the chief of staff and say, do we control the city? It's a yes or no question. If I say, I control the entire city except for 2 houses, okay, you don't control the whole city, right? So that's the point. It doesn't make a difference if it's how much how much of the thought, speech, and action the animal soul is in control of. But if the animal soul is in control of any part of my thought, speech, and action, I'm no longer a Beinoni. I'm in the state of wickedness, at least until I do teshuvah, until I repent. So that's chapter 11. It's a short chapter. It's a little depressing because somebody that we thought was a tzaddik could end up being actually a very good person, could end up being Rasha, wicked, but the wicked that is good for him, because there's a very wide spectrum of wickedness, as we will see. I think wickedness is the wrong word, or whatever. But then we'll try to figure out how to apply it to us and how to think about this. But we'll jump right in. It's a short chapter, not a lot of introduction necessary. In short, what's the difference between a incomplete Rasha and a complete Rasha? Incomplete Rasha is like this. The animal soul controls part of the thought, speech, and action. Any part. It could be a large part or a small part. Doesn't matter. But you can have somebody that the animal soul only controls thought, speech, and action for 1 minute a year. It doesn't matter. That means I'm not in control. The animal soul is in control. That means I'm not fully in control of my thought, speech, and action. I could also give my animal soul if my animal soul has complete control of my thought, speech, and action, I'm still not a complete Rasha if I regret it. Because regret represents that my godly soul is still felt within my psyche. Okay, so regret is a sign that I'm not a complete Rasha, and partial control of my godly soul is also a sign. To make somebody a complete Rasha, you have to have the animal soul is complete control of the garments all the time, and a person has no regrets. And that's when a person is a complete Rasha. Even so, however, it doesn't mean he doesn't have a godly soul, because the godly soul can't transform to evil, right? We talked about last week how the tzaddik transforms the animal soul to holiness, but you can't transform the godly soul to evil. So what happens to the completely evil guy? Where's his godly soul? And you can't exist without a godly soul, because nothing in this world could exist without holiness. So the answer is, Rabbi Sher Zalman is going to say, the godly soul is pushed out of your consciousness. It hovers above you. So it's present in the language of the Kabbalah. It's makif. It encompasses. It's there. It hovers above you because it's giving you life, but it has no expression within your psyche. And that's why the Talmud says, the divine presence dwells when there's 10 Jews. It doesn't matter if they're wicked or not wicked. Why? Because the fact that the godly soul hovers, that will happen always. So when you have 10 Jews combining all those godly souls, then it's a holy space. God comes, you can make a minyan, even if they're all completely wicked. It doesn't matter, because the godly soul still hovers above them. And that's what the Talmud says. Akol is Aramaic for on top of 10 Jews, the divine presence hovers. What does it mean on top? It means the divine soul is on top of them. It surrounds them. It doesn't enter their consciousness. And therefore there's no regret. But even so, they still have a godly soul. It's just above. So that's chapter 11. Maybe this will describe what we are, but that's not. But chapter 11 doesn't describe what we strive to be. What we strive to be is next chapter, is the Beinoni. As Rabbi Shneur Zalman will say in chapter 14, he says the Beinoni, complete control of the garments, is something that is accessible for every person, and that is what a person should strive for. Don't strive to be a tzaddik. Don't strive to be a person that has no negative impulses, and don't be comfortable being a person where the godly soul, where the animal soul sometimes dominates the thought, speech, and action. I mean, that's probably who we are. We're honest with ourselves, but that's not what we strive to be, and therefore we don't make peace with that. So that is in short, chapter 11. So we have 10 is the tzaddik, 11 is the Rasha, 12 is we're going to discuss the Beinoni, the intermediate person, the person to which this book was written for. The person is actively trying for dominance of thought, speech, and action, even though he knows that there will always be negative impulses within his soul, because he always has an animal soul, and there are two souls, and both souls are in battle. And once we figure that out, after chapter 12, now we have to figure out, okay, What are the techniques to overcome the battle? What is the inspiration to overcome the battle? How do I not get burnt out and depressed by the battle if I'm going to have to battle negativity my entire life? And ultimately, in the 40s, how to cultivate love and awe to God to strengthen the emotions of my godly soul and slowly but surely chip away at the emotions of my animal soul, chip away in the sense of transformation. So that's the big picture of the book. Okay, comments or questions, you can share now, jokes, or we could read the text inside. Like I said, it's a little bit shorter, so we'll read it maybe a little slower. We'll end up, and we won't have to rush as quick as we rush every week. Here we go. So this is Tanya chapter 11. Okay, lessons in Tanya. Again, the bold is the words of the Tanya, the non-bold is the translation, and then the shaded box is commentary. Okay, one is the opposite of the other. In other words, the wicked correspond to the righteous. And just like in the righteous, there are two classes, the complete and incomplete. The wicked also, there's complete and incomplete. Rasha, who knows good, is the antithesis of tzaddik, who knows evil. This means that the good that is in this Rasha's divine soul, which is in the brain and in the right part of the heart, these being the chief dwelling places of the divine soul, as explained in chapter 9, is subservient to and nullified within the evil of the animal soul, which stems from the klipot, which is in the left part of the heart, as explained in chapter 9. What is a Rasha? Just like a tzaddik is somebody who the animal soul is nullified to the godly soul, the Rasha is someone where the godly soul is nullified to the animal soul. The animal soul dominates. How much does it dominate? That doesn't matter. This rank 2 is subdivided into myriads of degrees which differ. In other words, the spectrum of an incomplete tzaddik, where at some point the animal soul dominates over the godly soul, that is a spectrum of myriads of levels. The difference between these myriad degrees lies in the quantity, i.e. the extent, and the quality of the nullification and subservience of the good to the evil, God forbid, and we're going to explain as we go. There is one in whom the subservience and nullification of good to evil are exceedingly minor. In other words, I only allow a little bit of my animal soul to dominate. So my godly soul is subservient to the animal soul only in a very small measure. And even these minor degrees are not permanent nor recurrent as at frequent intervals. Remember, he said earlier that there's quality and quantity. So he said this paragraph, there is one who's in whom the subservience and nullification are exceedingly minor. That's the quality. I only given a little bit. And then there's the quality of how, and that's the quality. And then there's also how often. Rather, only on infrequent occasions does the evil prevail over the good, conquering the small city, i.e. the body, which as mentioned in chapter 9 is likened to a small city whose conquest is the objective of both the divine and animal souls. Furthermore, even when the evil does conquer the body, yet not all of the body falls under its dominion, but only part of it, subjugating it, that part of the body, to its discipline and causing it to be a chariot to the evil, i.e. as subservient to the evil as the chariot is to the driver. And further, causing that part of the body to serve as a garment, wherein one of the animal soul's aforementioned 3 garments will be clothed. In other words, we're saying that within this spectrum of Rasha, you have somebody where the animal soul dominates even a little bit. But what does it dominate? Part of the body or part of the garments? And he explains, namely, the animal soul prevails either in deed alone, in the commission of minor transgressions only, not major ones, God forbid, for his animal soul has not the power to prevail to such an extent, or it may prevail in speech alone, but merely in the utterance of that which borders on slander or scoffing. In other words, it's not really slander, it only borders on slander, the evil being too weak to cause them to engage in actual slander or scoffing and the like. Or the evil may prevail in thoughts alone, in contemplation of sin, which are in certain respect worse than actual sin. So basically, Rabbi Shneur Zalman is spelling out where is the dominance of the animal soul. It could be even just a thought or a speech, even a small action or a speech or thought. Even a small thought would be that would make the person a Rasha because the animal soul has dominance. Now, it's interesting. He says, in some sense, he quotes the Talmud, Yuma. Yeah, he quotes the Talmud, who says that and contemplation of sin, entertaining sin in the mind, is worse than the actual sin, which is very strange. I would think robbing a bank is worse than thinking about robbing a bank. But the explanation is that in some sense, thought is worse because what is closer to you, your action or your thoughts, right? So your soul, it's a more sensitive area, right? It's like if you get a bang in your foot or you get a bang in your brain, right? The closer it is to a more sensitive part of self, the more, even a small blemish, you get a small blemish on your toenail, nothing will happen. You get a small blemish in your brain, and God forbid, it can have terrible results. So in some sense, the thought, because it's the more sublime part of self, it's more sensitive, and therefore the sin is more damaging. Now he continues. This is the case even when one does not actually contemplate committing a sin, but merely indulges in contemplation on the carnal union of male and female in general, whereby he violates the admonition of the Torah, you shall guard yourself from every wicked thing, which our sages interpret as an injunction that one must not harbor impure fancies by day, so that he will not become polluted at night. Thus, contemplation on such matters violates a command of the Torah. Or another area in which the evil may prevail in the cause of such a partial Rasha, when at the time fitting for Torah study, he turns his heart to it in inane matters. In other words, if he could study Torah and he'd waste his time. As is stated in the Mishnah, Tractate Avot, he who awakens at night when he has time to study Torah and turns his heart to vanity is guilty against his own soul. In other words, we're trying to paint the picture that even a very small, quote unquote small sin, even if it's just thought, speech, and action, or thought, speech, or action, again, makes me a Rasha, because that means my animal soul dominates one of the three garments. In any one of all these instances or the like, i.e., whenever one commits even a minor transgression in thought, speech, or action, he is called a Rasha, wicked at that time. The term Rasha meaning that the evil of his animal soul prevails within him, clothing itself in his body, including it, inducing it to sin and defiling it. Okay, but what happens in the godly soul, in the Rasha, in the incomplete Rasha? Once the animal soul dominates, you know what happens? The godly soul pushes back. Afterward, after this person has transgressed in any of the above mentioned matters, the good that is in his divine soul asserts itself, and he is filled with remorse over his transgression in thought, word, or action. He will seek pardon and forgiveness of God for the transgressions. And if he repents with the appropriate penitence, in accordance with the counsel of our sages of blessed memory, God will indeed forgive him with one of the three forms of pardon expounded by Rabbi Yishmael, as explained elsewhere. In the third section of Tanya, begins with the teachings of Rabbi Yishmael, the three types of teshuvah. In any case, that is somebody the higher spectrum of the incomplete Rasha, which is he only gives a very small sin, and it's only in thought, speech, and action, and it's not common, but it could occur. And now we're going to the other extreme. There is, however, another type of Rasha who knows good, in whom the evil prevails more strongly. All three garments of evil clothe themselves in him. He transgresses in thought and speech as well as in action. Also, the evil causes him to commit more heinous sins and to sin more frequently. Okay, so this is pretty bad. He often gives control to his animal soul of his thought, speech, and action. And it's not infrequent, it is frequent. Okay, so he's wicked. So why isn't he a completely wicked person? Why isn't he classified as completely weak, completely wicked? That is because, yet he too is nevertheless described as Rasha who knows good, for intermittently, between one sin and the next, he experiences remorse. And thoughts of repentance enter his mind, arising from the aspect of good that is still in his soul, that gathers a degree of strength in the interim. In other words, my godly soul pushes back. If I remorse, if I regret, if I feel bad, that means that my godly soul is still present within my consciousness. Problem is, it's not strong enough to take complete control. However, the good within him does not strengthen itself sufficiently to vanquish the evil, so that he can rid himself entirely of his sins and be as one who confesses his sins and abandons them once and for all, right? So this is interesting. I feel bad, but I can't stop doing the action. What does that say? So you could say, well, it means your regret is not genuine. And no, my regret is genuine. My regret comes from the godly soul. Of course it's genuine. Problem is, my godly soul is not the only soul, and my godly soul is not strong enough to dominate. And here we have a beautiful teaching of the sages that seems like we're putting down the wicked. And Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, no, it's actually beautiful. Concerning such a person, the rabbis of blessed memory have said, the wicked are full of remorse. In other words, they keep having nadarim. They keep regretting. So what does it mean? What are we trying to say? We're trying to say that the regret is genuine. They keep regretting. The problem is that the regret is not the regret, that the resurgence of the godly soul is not strong enough to get them to dominate the thought, speech, and action. So all I can do is regret. But the fact that I regret means that my godly soul is still present in my consciousness, and therefore I am not a complete Rasha. This represents the majority of the wicked, in whose soul there still lingers some good. And it is this good which causes these feelings of vexation and remorse in their mind and heart. So I would say that most people we know fall into the spectrum of Rasha v'tovlai, wicked and has good within him. In other words, especially by the definition of the Tanya, which is wicked. Most people aren't wicked, but most people are wicked by the definition of the Tanya, which means they're not in complete control of thought, speech, and action. But nevertheless, they have good within them. Now, there's an exception. There are some people who have no good within them whatsoever. I'm not sure I ever met somebody like that, but it's possible. But he who never feels contrition, and in whose mind no thoughts of repentance at all ever enter. His animal soul dominates his personality, no regret. He is called a Rasha who knows only evil. For only the evil in his soul has remained in him, having so prevailed over the good that the latter has departed from within him. There's no good within him, but it can't be disappear because everything needs good to survive. So that's what he explains. And the good now stands in a manner of makif over him. Makif is surrounding, encompassing, i.e. the good hovers over him, so to speak, in an aloof and external manner. When we say it's aloof, we mean it does not influence him. It's not able to influence him. And therefore he does not feel any remorse because he doesn't feel the perspective of the godly soul, because the godly soul has been pushed out of his consciousness and now just hovers above him. I.e. the good hovers above him, so to speak, in an aloof and external manner, so that he has no conscious awareness of it. Therefore, have the sages said, over every gathering of any 10 Jews rests the Shekhinah, the divine presence. Right? What does it mean? Any 10 Jews, even if a person is completely wicked, even if we could find 10 Jews who are completely wicked, I'm not sure we could, but even if we could find 10 Jews who are completely wicked, nevertheless, the divine presence rests above them. Why? Because they are, because their soul is still there, just above them. Our job is to bring it back into their consciousness. Okay, so you read this, and like I said last week, now you understand what the Hasidim said. The people who came to Rabbi Shneur Zalman who were world-class Torah scholars. Anywhere else they would be labeled as righteous and completely righteous. And they said, before we learned the Tanya, we thought we were righteous. Now that we learn the Tanya, we say halavai, we wish, we strive to be a Beinani, to be the intermediary person. Because according to the Tanya, what God wants of you, what you want of yourself, what your godly soul wants is not only to do good, but it wants dominance of your thought, speech, and action. And that, if you need complete control of your thought, speech, and action. I have here the commentary of Rabbi Steinsaltz, and I just opened it up 60 seconds before I started teaching because I read the different commentaries. But he says like this. He says, let's say somebody. Okay, let's start from a different way. How could this be that one person once a year I do one sin with my thought and I'm wicked? How could that be? So the answer is that when there are some things that are so important, you need complete control. You can't settle for 99% control. So what's a metaphor? Someone said like this. Someone said, sometimes I drive, I'm very, very tired. And you know what? Sometimes I fall asleep. But don't worry, it's not very often. It only happens once a month. Okay, so would you go into the car with someone who tells you, I fall asleep at the wheel once a month? The answer is, of course not. I don't care if you fall asleep twice a day or you fall asleep once a year. I'm not going with you, right? Because when it comes to a matter that is life or death, and for the soul, for the godly soul, allowing dominance to the animal soul, pushing it away from God is life and death. You're not going to say, oh, it's just a small sin. He only falls asleep for 10 seconds. Oh, by the way, when I fall asleep once a month, it's only for 10 seconds. Then I wake up. Doesn't matter. We don't want to have anything to do with you. In other words, from the perspective of the godly soul, this is terrible. Now, so what does it mean? Some sins are big, some sins are small. So Rabbi Steinsaltz says like this: somebody betrayed his country. Betrayed his country, helped the enemy. Okay, now the question is, did he give away a big state secret or a small secret? Doesn't matter. It matters to define what the punishment is, how severe the punishment is. But the fact is this person a traitor? Absolutely yes, right? In other words, we're differentiating between the question is either I am loyal or I'm not. Either I'm awake at the wheel or I'm asleep at the wheel. It's not, you can't have it both ways. It's either I am or I'm not. Now, if I'm not, then you could say, well, there's a spectrum, but the spectrum is less important to the essential question as, am I in control or am I not in control? And that's what the Beinoni wants to be. He wants to be in complete control. But I do have to reiterate, we have 2 minutes left, and not 2 minutes left, 2 minutes and 10:30. I do want to reiterate that while you may walk away from here and say, oh, I'm a tzaddik, I'm a Rasha, I'm wicked, and I hope to be a Beinoni, I hope to be somebody who has complete control. Remember that there's another way of looking at it. And the other way of looking at it is that we all are all three. In other words, regarding certain sins, we struggle and will succumb. And in those matters, we may be incomplete, wicked in a way that has some good. But there are other matters where we want to do evil, but we don't. In other words, there are other matters in which we have control of thought, speech, and action. And in those areas, we're a Beinoni. And there are other matters where we have no desire to do evil. And in those areas, we're righteous. And our job ultimately is to expand the areas in our life where we are a Beinoni, and hopefully, maybe a little bit, as we'll see in chapter 14, also expand the areas of life where we are righteous, right? So it's not an all or nothing proposition, right? I can be a Beinoni in certain areas and not yet in other areas, but strive to expand the areas with which I'm a Beinoni. But what's the big idea? The big idea here is that when the Talmud talks about the categories of people, righteous, wicked, and intermediary, there's one definition that we talk about action. And by that definition, if you're 51% good deeds, you go to heaven and you get a good year and everything is fine. And that's a wonderful definition. But that's not the only definition, as we proved on page 1 of the Tanya. Because page 1 of the Tanya tells you that even if a person does one sin, quotes the Talmud, who tells you that even one sin makes a person wicked. So 50% sins, you're for sure wicked. You're not intermediary. So here we have a deeper understanding of what we're talking about. We're talking about, it's really a state of the person's inner identity. It's not a state of what I do. It's what's happening within me. I am righteous if there's no battle within me, because I only feel my godly soul. I am wicked if I feel my animal soul and there's a battle between the two, and I succumb in my thought, speech, and action. I give away control of the garments. And I'm intermediary if I'm not righteous because I feel the urge of the animal soul, because my animal soul is very much present in my life. I'm not wicked because I don't give control to my animal soul over my thought, speech, and action. But my animal soul has urges. That's normal. That's fine. Welcome to humanity. That doesn't make you wicked. But I still have the ability to control the thought, speech, and action. And that would make me a Beinoni. And like a Chassidim said, Halavai Beinoni. That's what we strive to do. That's what we strive to be. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short. A lot more to say. Come back next week, because next week we need to find out how to be a Beinoni. What is the job of the Beinoni? And from here to the end of the book, we had enough with the righteous. We're tired of the righteous. We want to celebrate the intermediary guy who's in the battle. And the battle is where the drama is. And we love drama. So that's why we're here. Okay, wonderful Shabbos, everybody. Go ahead, Vicky.
Well, thank you so much. That was like very structured approach to categorize. I mean, fascinating. But I was just wondering if anywhere Shneur Zalman is talking about how much we rely on education to control the consciousness, because let's say, or in a way, like, for example, in some areas, influence a person who in some areas is completely no regret Rasha. Is there a way to influence that with education or anything, or even if education is not possible? So what are there any tools?
He doesn't say so in the Tanya, because the Tanya is not, how do I say this? It's not a book that will give you a solution to a specific problem. Because if it would be, you would have to have a library of books, right? When you go to other books of self-help, there's a library. The Tanya is giving you the understanding of the core issue. And that's why he's not telling you how to influence Yankel or Shmerel to do this in this scenario, because Yankel and Shmerel will respond differently, and there's different ways to do it. So this is not the book that will tell you, when Rish Ner Zalman says in the introduction, if you have trouble in implementing it, you have to go to the people in your generation, the people in your city who understand these matters, who are experts, and they can help guide you. But the point here is that what I'm trying to say is, I don't know that there's one answer, but is there possible that somebody who's completely wicked and has no remorse, is it possible that you can make them remorse? The short answer is, I don't know. It's certainly possible, but it doesn't mean that you definitely will be able to. How to do so? Well, if I had a chance, I would have to touch the person's soul and try to bring the soul into the consciousness. How? Studying Tanya. The Hasidim said the words Tanya come from the word Eitan, strength, same letters. And when you study about the godly soul, that has the ability to bring the godly soul into the consciousness, to reveal the soul. But the only problem is the person has to be listening. And that is the person's choice. So there's only so much you can preach, but you should try to preach. The answer is try to bring them to a Tanya class, because learning, thinking about the godly soul and realizing that there's another perspective, right? You get sort of this self-awareness. When I'm living in the moment and I'm just hearing the consciousness of my animal soul, I'm very much identified with the consciousness of the animal soul, but I have to say, 1 second, there may be more to my life. There may be other parts of my being that I'm suppressing, but how am I going to know about that if no one ever told me? Now, just because I know that there may be other parts of my consciousness that I'm suppressing, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm willing and open to change, right? So the short answer is, there's not a book that will give you the specific script of how to get to the person, assuming there is a specific script, which I don't think there is, right? But the concept is that when a person learns about, and you said, is there education? Yes, when the person learns about the concept and thinks about it and reads from this perspective and sees, you read the Tanya, you see, well, there's a soul within me, and the soul has certain desires. And just like my animal soul has desires, I start realizing that my godly soul has desires. Then that hopefully is the way to bring the makif, the hovering godly soul, that the divine presence shouldn't just be above me, but it should be within me. Right? Like we read in the parsha last week and this week, God says, make a temple so I can dwell in their midst. Right? So that's the short answer. Now, there are other ways, maybe for some people, even if intellectually they can't do it, but a mitzvah sometimes has the power to shake up the godly soul. But again, is there a specific guaranteed script of what to do for every person? Not necessarily. Because again, this is not every person is different, but the most important, this is not practical in the sense, it's not addressing the specific problem. It's addressing the core issues. And that's why he was able to put everything into one book.
Thank you.
And that's why when Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Raditchev saw the book, he said, how did he put such a great God into such a small book? Because the small Tanyas used to be a small book. Now they print big fancy Tanyas. But back in the day, the Tanya was a little teeny book. Pocket-sized. Okay.
Rabbi.
Yes.
So yesterday when we were learning about the garments and wearing clothes and how we can be something, truly on our inside, like our soul, you could be thinking or feeling something, and then you can force yourself to act in a different way that's different than who you are in your core.
Yes.
So then how does that go along with what we're saying here? That so I could think something, I could think I don't like somebody, but I could still host them for Shabbat dinner, which is doing the right thing. Right. But here we're saying that initial thought of me thinking poorly of someone is a bigger sin than the action of actually sinning.
Okay, so there's a few.
So then that thought was a sin.
So let's take this apart. Let's do this slowly. Karina, you're next. I'm sorry. Let's do this slowly. The first thing is, A negative thought is not a sin. You'll see next week when Rabbi Shneur Zalman describes the Beinoni, the negative thought is not up to you. It's your animal soul throwing the thought into your consciousness. It's not up to you. When it becomes a sin is when I realize that I'm thinking something negative, and I realize that I'm not supposed to, and I continue to because it feels good. That's when it becomes a sin. So the fact that thoughts are being thrown, that thoughts fall into my head, that's not a sin. So I hate this guy. It's not a sin. Not a sin to hate. Well, maybe. Well, not really. It's not a sin. It's a sin to act upon the hate. We'll get into that in another story when we get to the commandment to love your fellow. Don't hate your fellow in your heart. But thinking that the other person is not nice is not a sin. Okay, whatever. I mean, again, the question is if there's hate, if it's just objective reality. I said this guy is no good. He's a bank robber. I don't want him in my house. I don't think that that's a sin. If I just sit and contemplate how terrible he is, and just, like I said, I'm not sure it's a sin thinking about how bad the other guy is. If the person is, I say I don't want him in my house. It's Friday night dinner. I don't want him to walk out with my Shabbos candles. Okay, so that's objective. But assuming it's a sin to hate somebody, to think negative about somebody. Assuming that's a sin, the fact that it falls into my head is not a problem, because that's the function of the animal soul. The animal soul is knocking on my door. That's the knock on the door. Remember, we said the story. Not every person who knocks you have to open, but the knock, the fact that I'm being interrupted by the knock, that's not a sin. Only, as we'll see next week, only when I realize that it's a negative sin, that it's a negative thought. Not always are you conscious of what we're thinking about. Only when I realize and I choose to continue. In the language of the Alter Rebbe, Yeharher b'ratzayin, you think about it with your will, meaning you desire to think about it. That's when it becomes a sin. That's one point. Now, the other point which you mentioned is 1 second. Didn't we say yesterday that the garments affect the inside? So if the Beinoni is in complete control of thought, speech, and action, then he should be a tzaddik, right? That's what we said yesterday. We say the beged, the betrayal, the action ultimately will affect the inside. The answer is it will affect the inside, but not completely. In other words, if I'm not feeling kind and I do a kind act, so right now I'll feel kind, but does that mean from now on I'm completely transformed forever to be a kind person? No, tomorrow I may have to struggle with the same thing. Now, over time, the struggle becomes lessened and the kindness becomes more dominant. So over time, I'm affecting who I am inside. But can I get to a point of complete transformation? Not if I'm a Beinoni, right? It's like if I'm sad. So I act happy. Okay, so I go dance. Okay, so now I affected my inside. Does it mean tomorrow I'm never going to wake up sad again? No, it doesn't mean that way. It doesn't mean that. But when I do, and I act happy, it will once again affect my inside to some degree. And over time, if I'm somebody who's engaged in positive activity, over time, the struggle with the sadness will diminish. But will the struggle with the sadness disappear? For most people, no. And for the Beinoni, you can minimize the fight, and you could minimize the fight in certain areas. But will I get to a point because of my positive action, I will have no desire for evil whatsoever? Not necessarily. Now, it's possible you could get to the highest level of Beinoni is the animal soul is there, but it's asleep. That we'll get to in chapter 13. But that's a very, very high level. But I'm saying the standard level is, yes, I'm not feeling happy. I do an act that's happy. I'm in a better mood. It affected my inside. Does it mean tomorrow I'm not going to have to struggle with that? No, I will have to. If I do this for 10 years, does it mean that will my struggle with sadness diminish? Yes. Will my struggle disappear? No. So I don't know. Does this clarify a little bit? Does it help a little bit?
It clarifies, but the one question is the moment that the animal soul knocks at the door, we're saying that's a moment of being a Rasha, because that meant that the animal soul took control for that moment. Or even if I eat a sandwich and I'm just enjoying my sandwich, that's me feeding my animal soul. Because if I'm not thinking about the food going to a higher place, but I'm just thinking I'm hungry right now because I'm an animal.
There's two things here. Let's start with the easier question. The first question is absolutely not. If I have a thought that falls into my head, I could think about it for 20 minutes. I'm not a Rasha, because that is not the definition of losing control of my thought. Because thought by definition constantly flows, and the animal soul is constantly throwing thoughts into my mind. That doesn't mean I lost control. Lost control only means, like I said, when at the point when I'm self-aware and I identify and I identify this as a problem, and I say, you know what? I choose to do something that is negative, and think about it, and continue thinking about it once I identified it as bad. So that's unequivocal, right? But let's make sure we're on the same page on that. It's not about how long I think about it. I can think about it for an hour, but if I'm not aware, if I didn't realize, if my voice didn't say, 1 second, this is a problem, you should really be doing this. And then I say, you know what? It's actually fun. You know what? Let me continue doing it. That's the point when I cede control, when I give up the keys. But the fact that's the difference between thought and action, and speech and thought. And it doesn't elaborate upon here in chapter 3. Here, it doesn't really elaborate upon it too much because he treats them all as garments. But we mentioned it briefly that within the garments, there's the mind, there's the levush hamiyuchad. That's the garment that's the closest to you. It's unified with you. You can never stop thinking. So because you could stop acting, then when I do something, okay, I'm rambling, but even in action, my guess is that in action, if someone doesn't know it's a sin, it doesn't make him a Rasha, right? Because I don't know it's a sin, or I don't understand the severity of the sin. I grew up without the education, so I don't realize that this is a sin. So this is not really ceding control. Ceding control means I have all the awareness I need. In the thought, the Nefesh Elokit says this is a problem. I know it's a problem, but you know what? I'm going to do it anyway because it's fun. I know eating bread on Passover is wrong, but you know what? It tastes better than matzah, so I'll do it, right? So that's giving up control. So it's not about the thought per se. It's about giving up control of the thought. And I think, it doesn't say it here, but I think the same would be with the action, which is why a Jew who doesn't understand the importance of the mitzvah and does it by habit or by nature, or that's their education, I'm not going to go and say that person's a Rasha. Why not? Because again, it's not giving up control to the animal soul. A person doesn't have the proper awareness. It only works when you have the awareness. Then you're giving the other side the keys.
Does a tzaddik ever have the animal soul knock? Does a bad thought ever go into their head?
No, that's what makes you a tzaddik. Tzaddik makes you a tzaddik is that you're not attracted to evil. The world is not a bad place. It's a wonderful place. You're not attracted to evil.
Okay. So long as you shut it down, then you're good.
You shut it down when you realize that it's a problem. Like I said, it's not about how much time passes. There's no stopwatch. When I realize this is a bad thought, I shouldn't be thinking about this, right? It's not healthy. It's not productive, right? It's going to bring me down, right? Let's say I'm thinking, let's take a simple example. I'm thinking about thoughts that make me sad, give me a bad self-esteem. So is it a sin to think how terrible I am? Well, only once I realize that this is a problem and this is the product of my animal soul, of my animal soul, and I'm going to continue thinking about it because it feels good. It feels good to be sad. You know, at that point, it becomes a problem. But we'll see later. You'll see clearly that next week, you have to say, I'm feeling about it with will. I know what the problem is. I know it's wrong. I know this is my animal soul. I know my godly soul doesn't want it. I'm doing it. It feels good. Just like I'm gonna engage. I'm gonna rob a bank because it feels good. So at that, you have to have that level of awareness that it's wrong. And the mind, it's much harder to be self-aware of what the mind is thinking because you have to be thinking about what you're thinking. It's like meta thinking. Thinking about what I'm thinking. That you don't always realize what you're thinking about. But at some point, you realize, oh, you know something, this is really a problem. And then you say, then you have a choice. Am I going to continue thinking about this? Or am I going to change the garment? I can't take off the garment. Action and speech, I could stop. I could just stop talking. I could stop doing, but I can't stop thinking. So for that, I have to change the garment. But it comes, the point of handing over the keys is when I know that it's a problem, I have the choice to think about something else. I say, you know what? It's fun. Let's continue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we still have we have 53 chapters. So we're going to keep coming back to the same thing. So don't hesitate to raise it again. Go ahead, Karina.
Yes, no, it has to be with what Ami and you are talking. It's very difficult for me, like the definitions and it's like, I thought like the Beinoni had a lower standard until today. It's like today I see that the Beinoni is the one that, I mean, he has the tension between the souls, the struggles, but it's like it always, the godly soul dominates over the animal soul. If not,
only
you're
in the
wicked.
garments, only in the garments, thought, speech, and action. It's not a lot. I'm not saying as a joke, but I'm saying, no, but
Okay.
it's an important thing. It's not inner transformation. It's not going to change what I want, but it's going to change what I do.
Okay, but if I do, I mean, that makes me to be wicked.
Okay, so wicked is a bad word because it has negative.
Yes, that was something I was going to tell you. Like the word
Yeah.
is like very, very difficult to assimilate, because it's also, I understand like the Rasha who knows only evil.
Right.
I mean, that I
That's
understand, and it
so
makes sense.
So what, Karina, what you think is a Rasha, in other words, the conventional interpretation of a Rasha is Rabbi Shneur Zalman, is the Tanya's definition of complete Rasha,
Yes.
right?
The other one is like, it makes like.
So that's because we have the terms and we're influenced by the terms. Let's say I come to you, Karina, and I say, listen, we're going out for coffee and I want you to know who I am, and I don't want you to think I'm some saint. So I'll tell you the truth. I say, Karina, I have to make a confession. You say, what's the confession? I say, sometimes I have negative desires. So what are you going to do? You're going to get up and walk out of the coffee shop? You're going to say, how am I sitting with this other guy? He's a terrible guy. You're going to say, okay, welcome to humanity, but you're part of the club, right? So in other words, what you're saying is you're very comfortable that the person you're talking to, has negativity within them and has desires to do negative things.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're fine with that, probably because you say, you know what? Because if I don't like this guy and I sit next to the other table in the coffee shop, the person there also probably has a negative desire. Nothing wrong, you know. It's just your normal humanity. We have negative desires.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, you're making peace with the fact that I have negativity within myself.
Yeah.
So Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, that's Rasha. What's Rasha? I have negativity within myself. Forget about the label wicked.
Yes.
The label. But if I say I have wickedness within myself, would you say, I'm never talking to you again, I'm getting off the Zoom, I'm going to find a better Zoom for Friday morning? You could say that. I won't be offended because this is who I am. In other words, this is normal. This is humanity. But the point is that is not something that is offensive. If I tell you, Karina, we're having coffee. By the way, I have a confession today. Once a month, I rob a bank. So you say, this is not appropriate. You know, because you shouldn't be somebody who's doing negativity in your thought, speech, and action. Okay, so Rabbi Shneur Zalman, I concede, he has a much higher standard, because not only he doesn't want you to sin in thought, he also, in action, he doesn't want you to sin in thought. That's very, very hard. And that's why we're not saying throughout the 7 generations of people studying Tanya, we said a few people when I was growing up, they said Nissa Nemanov, a Jew who lived in France and came from Russia, said this guy's a Beinoni from the Tanya, right? So we have a few people that are. I don't think I'm a Beinoni from the Tanya. But the key here is, and why we're studying this, is because what is the aspiration? And that's the point. The point is not to figure out what am I. What is my aspiration? What do I want? What does God want of me? Okay. Does God want of me not to have negative emotions? No, that's not what God wants of me. Okay. And that's a lot of people don't like studying Tanya because they read the Tanya and say, this is crazy. The demand is too much. Demand is too much. But on the other hand, you have a very good trade-off, not a very good, you have an interesting trade-off. Rabbi Shneur Zalman says the fact that I wake up, I'm 90 years old. I've been studying Talmud for 90 years from morning to night. And now I wake up and I want to sin. That's 100% normal. It's 100% expected. God doesn't want anything else. You shouldn't be upset. There's nothing you can do about it. Embrace it. Love it. That's who you are. Nothing wrong with that. Okay? That is liberating. Right? That's liberating. I'm not a bad person if I have a bad desire. Why? Because it's my animal soul, and that's natural for the animal soul. And there's nothing I can do about it. And I shouldn't be upset that it happens, that I have the desire. So in that sense, it's liberating. On the other hand, it's demanding, because what is the aspiration? The aspiration is, okay, you want to do it. That's fine. That's no problem. In fact, that's why God created you this way, and God wants you to want to do the evil, because God wants the battlefield. Why? We'll see throughout the chapters, especially chapter 27. God wants the battlefield. So in that sense,
Yeah.
it's liberating because I can accept who I am, nothing wrong with who I am. I shouldn't try to change who I am. And remember, the people who came to Rabbi Shneur Zalman were frustrated because they tried to be a tzaddik. They said, how is this possible that I'm serving God for 30 years and I wake up in the morning and I want to do something despicable? How is this possible? And Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, take it easy. Welcome to humanity. You're a normal human being. Not only you're not bad for wanting that, you can't even change that even if you would want to. It's not that you were lazy and you were doing nothing. You can't change that. So in that sense, it's liberating.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there's a high bar for what is the aspiration. And the aspiration is a beautiful aspiration. The aspiration is, I should control what I do, what I speak, and what I think. Self-control. In other words, I should choose how I want to live my life, not only in action, but also in my thoughts, because my thoughts are the closest, most important part to me. Let's say I'm a person who struggles with sadness. So my aspiration should be that I should not let, or low self-esteem. Okay, that's a person who struggles with low self-esteem. My aspiration should be that when I identify a thought that increases my negative perception, I should be able to say, have a nice day. I'm not thinking about you. I'm going to think about something else. That's the aspiration, but it's also something we would want. It's logical. That's the life we want to live. We don't want to live a life where when we have a negative thought, we're forced to continue thinking about it. We want to learn how to say, if this is my struggle, how to say, I'm in control of my garment. I'm in control of my thought. Now, the fact that I have the negativity that these thoughts are going to arise in my consciousness, don't beat yourself up. That's completely normal. So I agree that it's a high bar. And like I said, a lot of people, it's very hard because everything is very black and white in the sense, either I'm my animal soul or my godly soul. There's no middle ground.
Yeah,
right?
and especially with the label of wicked. It's
Okay,
like,
so that's what I'm
it
saying.
could
That you have to
be
be,
like weak, like WEAK, you know, like it, okay, I'm not strong, I'm
Right.
weak, or my godly soul, but wicked, it's like,
that's a
too much.
term. Like I said, that's the baggage of the term. But the question is, am I at this moment expressing the will of my godly soul or the will of my animal soul? If I am asked myself right now, if I'm thinking something negative, and I ask myself, is my godly soul happy? The answer is no. Is my godly soul in pain? The answer is no. Yes, my godly soul's in pain. So that's the person I am. I have wickedness within. I have wickedness within me. There's no question about that. That shouldn't be a surprise. I actually should get a medal because the wickedness within me only dominates for a very small period of time, like we discussed in the first half of the chapter. Right? The spectrum is wide. Right? The spectrum is wide. It's not that Rasha v'Toivloi, a wicked that's good for him. The spectrum is wide. But I understand we're dealing here with against entrenched labels. So we have to now divest the label from the negative connotation. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It means I'm a person that the negativity within myself dominates. I'll be the first one to confess right here, even though it's not a church and you're not a priest and it's not Sunday. I'll be the first one to confess that I have negativity within myself. And if you really push me to the wall and I'm in really a good mood, I'll also confess that, you know something, sometimes the negativity within me takes over my thought, speech, and action. That's the way I am. Now, how are you going to label it? So forget about the labels. So what does this mean? Am I a person who has no negativity within myself? No. In brackets, I'm not a tzaddik. Am I a person that the negativity sometimes take over my thought, speech, and action? Yes. My negativity, in some sense, dominates. In some sense, a very small sense, but some sense. Am I a person who has complete control of thought, speech, and action? The Beinoni? No. Is that someone is that something I strive to? Of course. Do I strive to be a tzaddik? Of course not. So I try to basically tell you the last 3 chapters in Tanya without the negative connotations that we put onto those labels. Yeah. And in your mind, everything that's negative about a Rasha really applies to a complete Rasha.
Yes.
No remorse, no positive feelings, will do the evil and not care about it. The godly soul is present, but just hovers above.
Yeah.
Right? So so we have to, now why do we use these terms? We're forced to, because the Talmud itself gives us the 5 like I said, where Rabbi Shneur Zalman is being revolutionary, but is he being revolutionary within the framework of the Talmud? Everything he said on the first page has Talmudic sources. So it's clear that within Judaism, there's the one definition, the simple definition, which is if you're mostly wicked, you're wicked. If you're mostly righteous, you're righteous. That's the conventional definition, and that's the definition we all grew up with before we studied the Tanya. And that's a true definition. But it's not the ultimate definition. The ultimate definition is we're not just going to look at the thought, at the action. We're going to look at what's happening within the soul. In that sense, we have to expand the definitions. We have to create 5 definitions, 2 tzaddik, 2 rasha, a big spectrum within those. You can't really, even though you have a guy who once a year they do a small sin, is righteous and is an incomplete. Is a Rasha who's incomplete. You have somebody else that does 99.9%. I'm sorry, 99.9% of the day does evil, and he's also in that category, wicked that is good, incomplete wicked, right? The spectrum is vast. So the names the name Rasha, the label Rasha that we consider negative is not appropriate. But by this step, then you have to ask the definition. Am I a person who has some negativity, and that negativity, sometimes it dominates my soul? The answer is yes. I'll be the first one to tell you. I hope you're going to still talk to me.
Yes. Okay.
Oh, you're still on the call. You didn't hang up. Good. Thank God.
No, it's okay. No, I mean, the message, I got it like
Yes,
perfectly
yes,
and
yes.
it makes sense and everything.
Right.
But it's okay. I understand.
What am I adding? I'm adding here that the aspiration, 2 points. Number one is that you have to accept the negativity within myself, because that's who I am. And I cannot, that's the freedom that the book gives me. I'm free to embrace the fact that for my entire life, I'm going to have negative desires. And that doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It doesn't mean I'm lazy. It doesn't mean I'm immoral. Okay. In that sense, the book is very accepting and very embracing of humanity and liberating. On the other hand, the book tells you, you can aspire for more. I can aspire to be in control of my thoughts, speech, and action. It's something you could do. Is it hard? Yes. Does it take a tremendous amount of self-awareness and self-control? Yes. Is it something that I've done in the past? Well, we'll talk about that. Talk about that later. In every moment, I have a choice to decide on my identity at this moment. We'll talk about that next week. But in other words, should I aspire for this? If I want to live a good life, of course.
Yes, that's, sorry, Vicky, I'm finishing now, but this is the important thing about doing the classes with you and understanding, because if you read the book,
Yes, yeah.
it's like, it's very easy to say, oh, no, this is not for me.
Not for me, right.
So these classes are very, very useful and interesting. Thank you.
Not that I know, I heard it from other people. In other words, Rabbi Shneur Zalman in the introduction writes, because this is a general book that's going to really touch about the core issues that apply to everybody. He says it applies to everybody, but he says that people have to ask if you don't understand something, you have to look for the scholars in your city, and they'll give you wisdom. In other words, Tanya is a book that has to be studied with a mentor. Now, not that I figured this out on my own, but I had a mentor who studied Tanya from somebody who studied Tanya. So in other words, this tradition of how we read it and how we understand it and how we apply it. So we're all struggling for this. We're all searching and seeking for the same thing, which is to figure out what is our humanity, who we are, embrace who we are on one hand. On the other hand, not to be discouraged from reaching our full potential. You know, sometimes you embrace who I am and I say, okay, this is who I am. I don't have to improve. I lose my temper. That's who I am. Okay, let's give you an example. I'm somebody who loses my temper. I come home after 8:30 p.m. I have no patience. Problem is, when my kids went to sleep at 7:45, it was wonderful. Problem is, my kids now go to sleep after I do. So after 8:30, it's like hazard. Talk to me on your own risk. Nobody can know what can happen. Okay, so now I go to my shrink. I go to my psychologist. I say, should I feel bad that I lose my temper? So the fact that I have an urge to be impatient and to lose my temper, that is normal. That's the animal soul. That's never going to change. I mean, that won't necessarily change. That I have to embrace and accept. Does that mean I should go around and in my thought, speech, and action express my anger or express my impatience? No, I shouldn't. So embracing who I am should not stop me from aspiring to be in control, because I could. Some people just aspire for more, and it doesn't let them embrace who they are. And they hate themselves for being the person they are. Other people accept who they are, and they don't want to improve because this is who I am. But what Rabbi Shneur Zalman is doing, he's saying you can embrace who you are, accept who you are, not change who you are, but still aspire to control your thought, speech, and action. And I must conclude with the joke because it's the best joke. The joke is the guy who comes to his friend and he says, I have a big problem. It's ruining my life. He says, every day I come home, my kids get me so upset. I pick up a glass and I shatter it. And you know what happens then? Then for the whole night, I'm feeling so guilty. I can't even enjoy myself. And I go to sleep ridden with guilt. So the guy says, you must go to a psychologist. He'll solve all your problems. He goes to the psychologist. He comes back. He says, you saved my life. He says, what happened? He says, you're not upset anymore? No, every day I'm upset. I'm upset every day I come home. He says, you don't break the glass? He says, no, what do you mean? I break the glass every night. So what happens? Now I don't feel guilty about it. Right? So that's one approach. The approach is, I'm a person, I get upset. I'm going to break the glass. This is who I am. I'm embracing. So the first category, before he went to the shrink, the first category is, I'm very upset. I feel terrible. What am I going to do? I'm not accepting who I am. Second problem is, he accepted who he was. He said, I'm a guy who gets upset and break glasses. He accepted who he was and didn't aspire to change, which is also bad because you have to live with the guy who's breaking the glasses. If you come to the Tanya student and say, what do you do with this problem? He's going to say, listen, the fact that you want to break your glass, that's okay. That's who you are. We won't necessarily be able to change it. But what you should work on is don't shatter the glass. And Amy says that if you eventually, after doing this for a while, and not only not shatter the glass, but work on positive expressions in your thoughts, speech, and actions, act kind, take your kid on a walk, whatever you're going to do, ultimately, that will calm you down on the inside as well. But you see what I'm saying? I'm saying sometimes we don't accept who we are. So other times we accept who we are and we say, we're making peace with it. That's it. I have no more guilt. I am what I am. I have no more guilt. What Rabbi Shneur Zalman is doing, he's liberating me from the anxiety of saying how I'm such a terrible person because I lose my patience or because I'm upset. No, that's my animal soul. There's nothing wrong with that. On the other hand, that should not be licensed to break glasses. In other words, it's not that we're telling you don't allow the person embracing who you are to stifle your growth. You could improve in what areas? Thought, speech, and action primarily. Eventually, you could also go into the soul and minimize the feelings of the animal soul, but that's long-term. But in the immediate, right now, I'm upset. No problem. Don't break the glass. Right? That's be in control of your thought, speech, and action. And you know what? Don't even think to yourself, once you realize I'm thinking to myself how everybody is so bad and everyone's getting me upset and I'm entitled to sit on the couch with my feet up and I have no idea why people are not helping me. And instead I have to help them, right? It's the stories we tell ourselves in our mind. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, Yankel, Menachem, you don't have to think about this. You have the ability to think about something else. Do you have ability not to feel? No, but the thought, you could think about something else. That ties into lesson 1 of meditation from Sinai. Same idea. I can't control who I am in the moment, what I feel, but I control what I think about. So are we here to label the guy who's breaking the glass or harboring the thoughts of how everybody is so terrible to him? Am I labeling you as wicked? That's not what we're trying to do here. What we're trying to do is trying to say, this is what you could do. This is who you are, and embrace that, because you cannot rid yourself of the negativity within your heart. You'll always have an animal soul. On the other hand, so we're liberating you from that guilt. On the other hand, we're giving you a path forward to growth, and we're saying, this is where you can grow, and therefore this is where you should grow. And just because you accept who you are, don't allow that just because you accept the parts you cannot change, don't make that not realize the parts that you could change.
Perfect.
So this is why we're here. Yes. Okay.
Well, I just want to add a comment.
Yes. I'm just going to plug in because I'm on 2%. Go ahead.
Yeah, because of the whole discussion about labeling and stuff. I think everybody on that call who is questioning and reading deserves a medal, just for being self-aware. That's the only.
You're saying if you stayed along till chapter 11, and you read the whole chapter 11, and it's 11:07, and you're still here, you get a medal. Agreed.
That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
A wonderful Shabbos, everybody.
Shabbat
Take care. Next
shalom.
week is the big week. Next week is the Beinani, the intermediary, and that's where the fun begins. Okay, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you.